This is wonderful. My name is Diana Kataya. I am the founder of an organization called Coaching Peace, and we are a consulting company that works around organizational development, curriculum design, retreats, all of the things. We get to do whatever feels good for us, which is absolutely wonderful. I'm excited to be your moderator today and hear from the amazing panel that we have. I really want today to be a conversation, not a formal panel. I want us to not only kind of having me ask you questions and have conversations, but also feel free to interact with each other during this time as well. I really would love it if we could start from the beginning in just doing some quick introductions. You all, I could read bios forever, but really, you all know your story and who you are and your organizations better than any of us in the room. So I would love to begin by just doing some quick introductions. Introduce yourself as well as introduce kind of the high level your organization, and we'll dive into some of the questions as we go. So Nzinga, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. Dr. Nzinga Harrison, co-founder, chief medical officer of Eleanor Health. We serve people with substance use disorders and compassionate longitudinal care. I'm a physician. My specialties are psychiatry and addiction medicine. And in terms of who I was raised in Indianapolis, Indiana in the late 70s, early 80s, the daughter of the commander of the Black Panther militia, and my mother was a public school teacher. So raised an activist, and I am now, most importantly, wife and mother to two teenage boys.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. If we could go to Paris, I'm like I have so many questions in Zynga. I like but we have to do all the introductions. So
Yeah, I was hoping I didn't have to go after that, but
uh,
apparently my number's up. Paris Wallace. I am now the former CEO and founder of Ovia Health, HBS joint degree with Kennedy School class of 2008. Spent 15 years in the women's health space. Ultimately to create Ovia, which became the largest digital health platform for women and families, and helped thousands of employers improve health outcomes for families, for moms, trying to close the racial disparity in health and wellness, and around maternal mortality, and also worked with those employers to help them figure out why they couldn't keep women and families in their workplace based upon their policies and benefits. Ultimately sold that company last summer to LabCorp, exited that, and now actually starting another company in the DE&I and sports and women's equity space.
that is also one of my passions. So we'll have to talk later about that as well. I love this because I'm going to continue to make new friends as we go along in this process. Thank you so much, Paris. Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing that. Dave, would you mind sharing who you are and a little bit about your organization as well?
Yes, Dave Salvant, co-founder and president of Squire Technologies. Squire is kind of like a catch-all, multi-facet system for barbershops. We service everywhere from one barbershop to as many as 160 locations on our platform. We've been around since 2015. Yeah, we're almost a unicorn now, but yeah, it's been quite a journey. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here as well. As someone who frequents barbershops a lot, I definitely have some respect for that. Thank you all for joining us, and I want to start off this conversation. We talk about belonging a lot, and one of the things that's really interesting to me is that we often say that we want to create a space where people feel like they belong. And I am moving away from that in the sense that I don't want you to feel like you belong. I want you to belong. And I want each of you to really talk about your founder story through that lens of ensuring that the folks who interact with you, whether that's in your organization or those that you serve, belong. So I would love for you to tell your story, that founder story that we all love and that we really want to kind of learn and get perspective on through that lens of belonging. So, Dr. Harrison, would you start us off?
I will start us off, and you can call me Nzinga, although I definitely appreciate the respect on the title. We're having a conversation about this at Eleanor right now about how women, Black women especially, don't get called doctor. And so I appreciate that, but family, so Nzinga works. Um, our founder story, like business founder stories, that the opioid crisis was looming and taking up, grabbing a lot of space in the media and in people's hearts and minds as they were losing loved ones. And the company Oxyon Venture Studios that had the initial idea for Eleanor Health was looking for a value-based provider of substance use disorder so that we get paid for quantity as opposed to for quantity, which is what happens in a fee-for-service environment. And so they come up with the idea and then find founding executive teams to actually make an idea turn into a company. And they reached out to me. We're looking for a founding chief medical officer. They reached out to who is currently our co-founder and CEO, Corbin Petro, who is a gay white woman. And I think that was honestly by chance that she's a gay white woman and I'm a Black bisexual woman and our third co-founder is an Indian woman. But we immediately, the three of us as people, said to start a healthcare company that cares for people during their most vulnerable times, substance use disorders, any other chronic condition, being that it has to be about validating, nourishing, appreciating the innate humanity of the people that serve and the people who are being served, period. And so we very quickly, from the very beginning, started branding ourselves. And I put branding in quotes because it's not a brand, it's who we are, but as Black, brown, gay, woman founded, like when you come to Eleanor Health, whether it's working here or whether it's receiving services here, it should feel like a warm hug every time. And so we started just pouring intention into that from the very beginning, trying to build all of our processes, make all of our decisions from values first. Like, does this include people? How does this exclude people? And if it's something structural that we can't fix, how do we mitigate it? And just really built that into the fabric of our very existence as we were building the culture of Eleanor from scratch.
That is amazing, and thank you for sharing all of that. Um, I have so many questions I want to ask around kind of really getting to understand that as you kind of talk about branding, but really about how you integrate your lived experiences, all of you, into the work that you're doing, and how easy that becomes because it is something that is just innate. It's in you. It's what you want to do.
Ma'am, I don't think it ever becomes easy because even though it's innate and we're all committed to it, we all live and work in structures where it's
Absolutely.
not safe to talk about these things. You have to choose your words carefully. You have to think about, what are the business implications? If this writing gets out to the world, like, what's that gonna say about Eleanor, right? And so I don't think it ever is easy. What I think it has to be is intentional. And so you started out with the question, we want people to feel like they belong. And you're like, I want people to actually belong. I agree with that, but I think actual belonging first comes through a
Feeling.
feeling
Yeah.
of being wanted,
Right.
right? A feeling of being appreciated, a feeling of being valued. And depending on what your life experiences are, everybody has had devaluing experiences because unfortunately that's like part of our culture here.
Absolutely.
Some people have had structurally devaluing experiences designed to oppress like whatever group that you're a part of, right? But all of us have had devaluing experiences. That sense of belonging, I think where companies make mistakes, and we have fallen into these mistakes also, is like feeling like we got it. Like we did it, we created a culture, you feel like you belong and you get comfortable. And all of us have these histories of traumatic unbelonging experiences. And it takes a very small trigger for you to be in a place that's created to be safe and not be feeling safe. And so it's just like that constant vigilance, but I think also acknowledging we live and work in systems, and we have all been steeped in systems that really train us by reflex to be devaluing. So I'm going to make that mistake.
Yeah.
And I'm going to want to make a different decision and feel constrained to make that decision. But keep pouring intention and keep doing the hard work. Like if the work has gotten easy, then I think you're not doing the work.
Yeah. Thank you for that context, and that the idea of like holding that word intentionality and commitment, and that it is a daily practice. It is something that you are constantly doing. I appreciate that so much. Thank you for that. Paris, maybe you can talk a little bit also about your founder story, and through that kind of lens of belonging, and if there's a way of also kind of highlighting if there was some intentionality around the way you did that.
Yeah, we might have to change the order because I don't know if I can continue to go after the good doctor. But, I mean, I guess for me, right, it's, with every company, the company story is really kind of the founder story in a lot of ways, and I think when I think back to starting Ovia in 2012, right, it was and when I founded it and when I tried to be intentional of it, I don't think to that point in my life I had ever been in the space that I belonged in, and so I didn't even know how to have that approach and what to do. Right, I'm mixed race, but born to a disabled single mother. Grew up in Section 8 housing on welfare, but had full financial aid to be the one kid of color in my super elite $50,000 a year elementary, pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, K through 8th, high school, Amherst College, Harvard Business School, Kennedy School. It was very clear that, that I did not belong in those spaces. I was being invited, I was being included, but what does inclusion look like when, everyone else in your class gets to decide to either have the BMW or the Range Rover when they turn 16, and I'm still riding my bike, right? And so I think that by the time, and I went to HBS 1 year out of college, and then started a company my last year at HBS, so I'd never worked at a company in a proper job, and I think did my best. And I think over the 10 years at Ovia, my own understanding of it, and who I was and what I was comfortable doing and not doing, and really I would say leading as opposed to fitting in. Early on when I go and raise capital for this business, and I'd walk into this room of all white guys, I would be the only person of color, and like there were no women, so it wasn't like I'm obviously not a woman, but I was the only person who had ever even considered apparently women as a place that you would want to dedicate your career to. I remember one meeting that with a Silicon Valley group that had just invested $20 million in an app that said "Yo," and you can look it up. It really happened. I present, and they said women's health is a niche market, and then called what they called their secretary in, because that was the one woman in the office, to talk about what it was like and if she thought that people would use a period tracker because it seems incredibly niche. So my joke was I started putting on the first slide, turns out there's this crazy market opportunity, really overlooked, super niche. There's only 3.5 billion women in the world, but like they actually, like it's worth it to create companies around them. They spend money, they buy stuff. They're like, and like, it's kind of funny, but like, that's actually where the industry was. And it's been amazing to see it move forward. But right, like, I had to get out there, right? And by being an out-group advocate for women's issues, I started being able to advocate for myself and be a lot more comfortable telling my own story of inclusion and not belonging, and set about trying to create a culture of belonging, which came with, me having to try to be the thing that I'm worst at, which is vulnerable. I'd lived my whole life fitting in and living two very different lives at home and at school and, wherever, and taking on a lot of responsibilities that the folks around me did not. And through the vulnerability that my employees showed, we had a 2-hour meeting after George Floyd's death, where one of our employees said that her cousin was killed by police when he was a junior in college, and everyone in the company cried, right, together, right? And then, and those types of experiences, I would say, really led to who we became and the culture we built. But I can't take credit for it, right? Because I was leading from behind, and pun intended there, leading from behind on this thing, on vulnerability, on the racial issues, on the belonging things. But we got there. I mean, I think frankly, because I knew I wasn't good at it. And so as other people stepped up, we really highlighted just how amazing they were, what they were able to do. And as more and more people did it, it became clear that that was part of who you had to be successful at the company that we were building. And then everyone kind of let down their guards. And there were some Trump Republicans who came out and felt really, and then we said, we can embrace you. And there were, and obviously a lot of people on the other side too. And we had those discussions, and it really became a safe place. But I don't think it's up to the leader to do it. I think it's up to the leader to create the environment where individuals can step up and make it happen. Because, like anything that's top down doesn't work. It's got to be, bottoms up. When I look back at kind of the greatest thing that happened at Ovia, actually after I left as CEO, one of our former employees reached out and said, I've decided to be myself, and to really express my preferred gender identity at work. I was able to do this at work before I could do it at home. And this person was in their 50s, and they had spent their whole life being someone that they felt that they weren't, but never felt a space that they belonged, and could be honest with themselves and the people that they were spending time with every day. And again, I can't take credit for it, but the fact that is my greatest accomplishment over 10 years at the company, that we built a culture like that, shows the attitude you need to really be able to achieve these things.
Paris, there's so much to unpack there, and so much good stuff. A couple of things stood out for me. The idea of creating space is so important as leaders, right? Like when you create an environment, but you create space for others to take on the role of leaders at times, to feel as though they can express their emotions, that they can be vulnerable, I think is so powerful and important and necessary in the work that we do every day. I think the idea of looking at inclusion, right? We've looked at inclusion as kind of this is what we want, but really inclusion is not where we want to be. We want to be a belonging, because inclusion means we set up this whole system. We didn't design it for you. In fact, we might have designed it to keep you out, but we're going to just there's a back door. We're going to open it for you. You're welcome to come in. And you're like, no. That doesn't make me feel anything other than I'm kind of a guest at your party. And I don't want to be a guest at your party anymore. I want this to be my party. So how do we do that? And how do we create that? And it seems like you've really kind of created this space where that can happen. So I really, really appreciate that. Dave, talk to us a little bit around your kind of founder story, and how you created the idea and how belonging fits into all of this.
Yeah. So, Squire, before Squire, I share similar background. public school, welfare, the whole Section 8, the whole 9 yards. And throughout my professional career, whether that be in finance or in college, you get a sense that you're the only one of color. On my sales desk and on my finance gig, there was like 50 people on the desk. I was like one of two. And that pattern, that pattern of belonging or feeling wanted, because that's what belonging is, feeling wanted or desired, is just not there. So, when I went to business school, it was still not there as well. So, outside when we decided to start the company, both my co-founder and I felt that we wanted to build a culture and build an organization where everyone from every single walk of life felt wanted or felt a way of a feeling of being belonging. And I think that was kind of the ethos of the organization from the very beginning. And I'm probably gonna say this, but I think we're probably one of the most diverse companies at this size, versus from a gender diversity and a racial diversity amongst that at our versus our peer groups. So I'm super proud of that. But not only that, I think we really preach and really try to invoke a sense of belonging amongst our employees. So we do monthly chats about diversity. We do monthly chats about LGBTQ, and we do everything about with intention to make sure people are comfortable in their own skin. And I think that kind of ethos from the top really sense and vibrates through the organization. So I think you have to be very intentional about it. You have to really be one of the pillars your company is built on, and you really have to breathe it. It can't just be like words on a piece of paper or values that you don't work through on a consistent basis. And I think we've been very intentional about that. So I think that's what led us to to be one of the great things we stand on.
Somebody had to at least start talking on mute at one point in this conversation. Now it's me. I feel like it's done. We can move on now. So Dave, you talked about these kind of monthly chats that you have. I would love, can you give us a little bit, like dive into that a little bit? Like what is the, what comes of those? What are some of the prompts that you have? Or is it organic? Is it when it's necessary?
I mean, it's a little hard during COVID, but these chats have virtually most of them, and it's just a monthly check-in of like, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Like, are any topics that you feel strongly about? I think last conversation was about surrounding Ukraine, and how do you feel about that? How does that make you feel? We did one on George Floyd. When that happened, that unfortunate situation happened. So I think you want to stay close to the people that work in your organization, and you really want to show that you care, like you care, and it's not just a job or not just something that you get a paycheck. And I think it's actually good for business, and it's good for output, and it's also good just be a good person if you're in a position to make the people that work in your organization feel welcome, feel comfortable. And I think it allows it reduces attrition, but it also promotes high morale amongst your people that work for you. So I think it's a good business case, but also it's the right thing to do. You should care about people who work in your organization.
So many organizations shy away from talking about emotion within the workplace. We have set up systems in this country where, for some reason, we believe that you are not a feeling being when you from 9 to 5, but somehow outside of that you are. But we can't talk about those things, and I think we are moving in a different direction because we recognize and understand the value of that. And Nzinga, I would love to talk to you about that a little bit and kind of stay on that idea of emotion. In the work that you are doing every single day, you are really working with helping folks in some of the most vulnerable times of their lives. And I would assume that within your organization, allowing those emotions and feelings is central. How do you then, or are you able then to take that within your staff and begin to like really socialize that and say, hey, we too in this space can talk about the emotions that we are experiencing, because we can't divorce those two things.
Yeah, I think it's critically important. And we've poured a lot of effort into trying to create that space through creating rituals. And
Mm,
so, one of the rituals that we have in the company, every meeting starts with, if it's a huge meeting, a subset of people. If it's a small meeting, every person saying what their color is. And it's a three-step exercise. What is your color? What does that color mean today? Right? Because you could say I'm blue and I say I'm blue, and that's not the same.
right.
And what do you need from the team? And it's designed to create the space for people to be like, I'm red hot today. My anxiety is off the charts for this personal professional reason. And what I need from y'all to know is that when I get red hot, my mouth gets quick. So if I offend you, please charge it to the anxiety, not to the heart, right? And so, like, we have introduced that ritual. And as people come on, because I think one of the most important things you've heard Paris say, you've heard Dave say, I'm going to say now, is like, and you said it, Diana, in the beginning, you have to talk about belonging to
Mm-hmm.
create a sense of belonging. You have to talk about feelings and emotions to create safety for people to be people, which are feeling sentient beings. And so it's from onboarding, the moment a person starts at Eleanor, they learn that ritual. In their first week, they have culture, oppression, racism, and recovery training. And that's where we talk about, like, listen, we have to try at Eleanor, and we have to create an environment where you can say, this is how I feel, this is how that landed on me. You need to be able to receive feedback, right? And then the kind of like other very tangible way we try to create a way for people to be able to feel in our all hands meetings every Tuesday, we take a moment of reflection. And the moment of reflection is like, feel yourself. Think about what you've done for somebody. Think about what someone has done for you. Paris is trying to get to that vulnerability. It's, let's take a moment of silence for Ukraine, Dave, to like open those conversations. And if you leave here and you need to go talk to your team about it, creating the space to do that. And so it's just, we have to be explicit about building in rituals that require people to feel in public as a part of way of training ourselves out of not feeling in public, which is what we've all been trained.
Right, absolutely. And I absolutely love your use of the term ritual. It's not a practice, it's not just an exercise that we do, it's a ritual. It has meaning, it has value, and we connect that to that. And I think that's so valuable. You know, Paris, you talked about, and you were kind of open around this idea of vulnerability and, you know, how you've learned kind of in this process. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because the other thing you talked about was the fact that you are founding an organization dedicated to women. You don't identify in that way, right? There's a fair amount of learning that has to happen. And oftentimes, especially when we're founding an organization, we feel like we have all the answers, we are leading, we're there. What are the ways in which you kind of constructed your own experience in that process to really be open to learning and to understanding and to listening and all of those things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that was, and frankly, it's something that like I never really wrapped my head around, and I think a lot of outsiders never really wrap their heads around either. But you know, a few things. One is recognizing the value and the power of being an outgroup advocate, right? So when you're in a room and a women's issue comes up and a woman speaks to it, that's because she's a woman, But if someone who you would never think is sitting mean mugging in the corner and speaks up and speaks incredibly vehemently about why this is a big issue, it's, it really makes a difference. One thing I did, right, is every time a VC or private equity person reached out to me, regardless of how I was raising money or not, I'd get back to them and say, hey, this is a women's health company. Do you have a woman partner? And most of the time they'd come back with some bullshit excuse. We just hired our first associate, and in 15 years, she's going to have I was like, sorry, that's an absolute requirement for us. That's something you should deal with immediately. We won't, give me a call back when you have that figured out, right? And it was so powerful to see people pander and just to not expect that coming from someone that didn't represent the group that you were advocating for, which is right. I mean, again, like the number one question is like, why are you interested in women's health? I'm like, if you worked at a men's health business, no one would say that, right? Like no one would be like, oh, but it is really, I think, calling out these disparities where you can have a tremendous amount of power on the out group kind of advocate side. The other thing that we did that I think really worked well is we were really deliberate about who we wanted to hire and some specific attributes that we could look for during the interview process, as well as who we wanted people to represent. Right. And one thing I found incredibly powerful is you make one or two decisions. Right. I always say, fire the smartest asshole in the company. And everyone will say, wait, but that person hit their quota, or that person was the smartest programmer. They're impossible to replace. And you go, nope, they did not represent the values that we want. And so they have no role there. Total game changer, right? Someone said that the culture of a company is the worst behavior the CEO is willing to put up with, right? The other piece is just we were user first. And so, that meant every company meeting, we started with a user story, either a user talking about the value we had or someone else sharing that. Secondly, right, every decision we made when we had big meetings, we'd say, hey, you represent random person, you represent the user's perspective, and make sure that doesn't get lost in this discussion. And then lastly, early on in the company, we had the biggest deal that we've ever had on the table by an order of magnitude with a health insurance company who wanted us to come and work with them. And they said, at this time, we're not able to deal with miscarriage. And so you need to take that out of your product if you're going to sign this multi-million-dollar, multi-year deal with us. And we said 40% of our users, 40% of our users experience this. This is something that can no longer be dealt with in the darkness. That's why it's actually causing this issue for our users. We said no to the deal. 5 years later, people were still talking about that, right? And so again, it's like, what are these actions you can take? What are these stories that you can tell that make it very clear about who you are, who you represent? One example in the interview process that was a must-have was every candidate had to say vagina. Because if a candidate couldn't say vagina without smiling or turning red or whatever, they weren't an Ovia person, right? I mean, it just was not the appropriate thing. Like, it's not a bad word. It's not an inappropriate word, right? And if you think it is, then you didn't belong here, right? Talking about belonging and unbelonging, right? Like that is something that was not going to make you. And we were pretty explicit about that. We found various ways to kind of bring it up and see what people did. But I think being really, really deliberate about what are the decisions you're going to make, who are you going to make those decisions for, what are the stories you're going to tell, and ultimately, like, who is your type of person and who is not? How are you going to separate those two folks? And then how are you actually going to live by those decisions and make sure that when someone doesn't fit in, regardless of how great they are, to say no? Because for every great person that is making other people feel like they don't belong, you're going to have 10 other people that are not going to be allowed to be great or not going to be allowed to shine. So that's some of the things we actually tangibly did and put in place to be able to make sure we had a culture that supported these types of behaviors and activities and attracted the right people.
That is fantastic. It's the first panel I've ever moderated that has had the word vagina in it. So I'm very excited about that. That is a first for me today and amazing. So thank you. And I think you also talk about something that's really important, which is this idea of, as we bring folks into our organization, obviously we want everybody to belong in this organization, but we also want to make sure that whomever we are bringing in will continue to perpetuate the culture. And there are things that sometimes we can train and we can work with folks around it. And there are things that sometimes are fundamentally we just can't do. Dave, you talked about earlier this idea, you said, you have one of the most diverse organizations. I would love for you to talk a little bit about your interview process and your recruitment process. Like, how are you kind of creating this culture, but also how did you get to have the most diverse, organization?
I mean, so I think it's twofold. Number one, you have to be intentional about it. We have to say, put out, we are looking for diverse candidates. And sometimes, they're a little more difficult to find. But I think if you're, intentional about it, you can accomplish it. Secondly, the leadership, our executive leadership is myself, Song, who are African American, VP of Engineering, who's African American, head of product, who's Russian, CMO, who is a woman, VP of Finance is a Black man. Sales and VP of Sales, who is a white man. So if you look at our executive team, it's very indicative of what we value. And I'm proud to say, I think over 50% of our company is are women, and another of that 50%, a lot of are diverse, underrepresented minorities. So I think it's a direct reflection of the work we put in to accomplish that. It's also a reflection of we want to be an inclusive place. I think we don't attrit many employees either, because we stand behind our values and we're supportive to our employees, and we want to push a company in a culture of belonging. And I think once those ideas align, where you're talking about it, but you not only talk, but you walk the walk, and people see that you're intentional about it, I think that's when you have a great organization, and that's when people want to work there, they want to stay there, they want to do their life's work there. And I think that's kind of what we've been intentional about doing.
So there's kind of different phases in a startup, in any organization, right? And you kind of have that startup phase where you're lean and you're going around and trying to obviously figure out your finances, trying to put together your team. And there's a set of belonging and a culture that you're setting there. And then there's the growth phase. And I feel like all of you are kind of in that next phase of like real growth. Is there a difference in the way that you maintain your culture from the beginning to now, where you're at in your process now?
I think culture starts with leaders of the organization, and it's going to cascade down to the rest of the organization. But if you are dead set of like, this is what these are your values as a company, as an organization, and I think a lot of companies just write it down. Oh, here are my values of the company, but they don't breathe it, they don't eat it, they don't sleep it. And once you start doing that, I think combined with the leadership that is always on point, always seeing that direction, I think that's when you build a great culture and an inclusive culture and a culture of belonging.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Nzinga, Paris.
I'm giving it to you first, Paris.
Yeah, so the hard part about having a company grow at 50%, 100%, 200% is you need to get that much better every year. And everyone else needs to get that much better every year as well. And so, you get to certain points where people really need to level up. and your board and other people are going to pressure and say, hey, you need to get outside folks. You know, and it's really tricky because people are the culture of the organization, and the way you treat those people is incredibly important, but you also have a business imperative. So, you know, when, you know, we got to a point where our board kind of made us hire this middle layer of management who happened to be majority white males. And then the pandemic struck, and and I got the opportunity to let all of them go and promote all the women who were doing kind of all the work. And it was a total game changer and allowed us to grow. But right, I mean, the tricky piece is, I mean, this is, you know, and Dave's certainly been able to do this, right? Like, can you grow? Can your people grow at 100, 200% year over year indefinitely? How do you recognize that in yourself? How do you recognize that in other people? And then how do you make the appropriate changes without breaking the culture and breaking what you've done, especially with those early employees who are really great at 10 and at 50 and at 100 and maybe at 250, but when you get to 1,000, it's not going to work anymore. And I don't have a great answer for that. You know, I mean, we got out relatively early. We were growing really quickly on the revenue side, but as a digital health company, we were able to keep the number of people down. When we sold the company, we still had all 4 founders, you know, in an operating role in the company, which was key. If any of them had left, it would have been a disastrous blow. So I don't have a good answer other than to say it's hard. And I think you really have to have that conversation with people. You know, have that conversation with people and be clear about the time frame you're hiring people for, and how to think about that, to say, hey, you really make sense now. I don't know if it's going to make sense in a year. Here's what you're going to do. And some other things like that. But, you know, other than kind of the very HR side of things, I don't have a great answer.
Yeah. But prioritizing, it seems, what's important, right? Like, as Nzinga, you were talking about earlier, this idea of like making it a commitment that you know, all of you seem very human centered. You're kind of focused on process, not just outcome, around the organization. So, Nzinga, can you talk a little bit about that as well for you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think about it really. I think the more you scale, the more tactical you have to be about creating belonging. So in the beginning, when there were 3 of us, when it was me, Corbin, and Michael, our chief people officer, like, and Shristi, our co-founder, so 4 of us, we didn't have to have tactics in place to make us evangelists because we were automatically evangelists for belonging. But as we grew 100%, 200%, more percent year over year, then we started to have to think about, like, Paris was saying, who are our people? We call them Eleanor people, right? Like, how do you actually train your interviewer to identify a not Eleanor person? And that's not homogenous thinking. Like we had, and same Paris said, how do you make the hard decisions? We had a very visible person in the company when George Floyd was killed, who came out with some really hurtful stuff on one of our Slack channels. It was like very surprising. And we shut it down, and we, you know, came into all hands. We brought him in, and it was like, we understand your experience has brought you to this place. What was lacking was compassion. And compassion is a deal breaker at Eleanor. Like, you don't have to believe what everybody believes. You don't have to, but if you can't communicate compassionately with people who have had a different experience, that is a deal breaker. So are we going to be able to get to compassion? And he demonstrated in that meeting that he was not, and then we let it go. And then we came into all hands, and we were like, you will notice this person is not here. It is not because he didn't think everything we all thought. It was because you all saw the lack of compassion in those messages. Compassion is a deal breaker. So you try to make evangelists, you do it in your rituals, you do in your Slack, you train people, you make it part of company meetings. And it's like, the bigger you get, the more you have to think is about, what is the tactic we are training people in and holding people accountable to for evangelizing belonging. And I'll just give an example here. I'm looking at our Slack channels. This is part of the culture that I love about us at Eleanor Health. Anybody can start a Slack channel for any reason. And I'm looking at our Slack channels, and it has Black Eleanor. It has Black Lives Matter Committee, which is one of our accountability committees, Eleanor Pride, Eleanor Cookbook, emoji enthusiasts, where like you can just go on there and ask the engineering team to create you any emoji you want. And then they like release new emojis, right? Member stories, a gratitude channel, a self-care channel, a Pets for Days channel, a Plants and Gardens channel. These are all ways people are evangelizing. They're saying, I love this. Who else loves this? And you have a Slack channel that's fostering belonging. That's a super tactical strategy, but those are the things as you scale, we have hundreds and thousands of people. You can't touch every person. You need your tactics to be touching every person.
And just a quick comment on that, like the best way that I've heard it articulated is like this elevator test. So, right, there's a new person, they don't know who you are, you get on the elevator, it's their first day, and they turn to you and say, I'm so excited, it's my first day, I'm excited because of XYZ. And they don't know who you are, right? That you're the founder, that you're the CEO, whatever, and that's your message, right? And that through the interview process, they're getting to know people, they are here because of the things that matter to you and that matter to the company. Like that's when you know you've got it and you've cracked the code, that it's not you, it's not even someone who works for you or someone who works for you who works for you, right? It's this random person who gets it and knows it and is coming to the company because of it.
So I love that idea. I might steal that and give you credit. Don't worry. But each of you have talked about like a lot of the successes and some of the challenges, but a lot of the successes. Obviously, when you start an organization, I know I started mine 10 years ago. If I knew now then some of the things that I know now, I would have done things differently. What learnings, especially in the space of belonging, if you could go back and redo this again with the knowledge that you have now around culture and some of the challenges that you've had in that culture, are there things that you might have done differently? Is there learning that you might have engaged in for yourself differently? Are there any decisions that you would have made any differently? So if you could kind of take a moment to think about that, what advice would you pass along? Said, hey, we did this. You might want to do this differently, or at least have some context for it. And I'll open it up for whomever is ready, instead of calling on.
I'll just go fast. I'm coveting Dave's executive leadership team at Eleanor. I love all my people. All the people at the table are white except for Nzinga. And so I think the learning is you have to do it from the beginning, because once you get behind the ball, you are behind the ball. And I don't mean to say I'm behind the ball with my people, because my people are legit, like they are ride and die belonging people for sure, but we're homogenous. And so do it, take the time to be diverse from the very beginning, right, so that you're not trying to play catch up after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
They might be frozen. I would just
go ahead, go loud.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, similar, just patience, right? Like realizing that you're not realizing and being open that you're probably not going to get it right, and you're going to have to try, and you're on a journey, and you're going to get lost a couple times, but you're all committed and going to do it right. And then admitting when you get it wrong and trying to change it and trying to keep everyone else on board through kind of that vulnerability. I mean, I think I wanted to get it right, kind of like, right? And like, really, it was like, hey, let's give it a try. Hopefully this will work. Like, give your feedback, get involved. Because when I was trying to control it, it didn't work. It was when I had patience and got a team and gave other people the responsibility for it that it really worked forward. And then when we just addressed stuff when we got it wrong.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Dave.
Cool. And I think the foster system of belonging and any mistakes, I think you just got to listen. You got to listen. You got to listen to employees listen to your organization, because they're gonna tell you. They're gonna tell you. So listen, especially with issues like this, and wanting people to feel a sense of belonging. Open your ears, listen, just listen, and allow the discussion to be free flowing, and don't kind of like institute yourself too much into it. You want people to come out and be vulnerable, and by being vulnerable, they'll be accepted. So I think just listening is the most critical component.
So, when you think about your organizations now, this is I'm the moderator with the hard hitting questions here today. So, when you think about your organizations, and say Paris as maybe potential, you can think about it as the organization you were the CEO of, the organization you're looking to start. However, you're kind of would like to answer this question. What's the challenge over the next 5 years around belonging? What's the thing that you have to begin to think about and start to figure out? And I'm not going to use the term get right, because I think in Paris's point, it is about just figuring it out and kind of going through. But what's the next thing? What's the next kind of challenge that you have around belonging within your organization? And Nzinga, could you start us off, or Paris, if you took yourself off mute first, if you'd like.
I would just say I'm old, and it's hard to adapt and be okay with new things, right? And that really, it's hard. People talk about stuff, I don't even know what the thing is. And just to stay relevant, I have to work harder and have these embarrassing questions and be like, what is that? I don't even know what does it mean? And I think it's what is it? You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I think that's like, you're at risk of that, right? Because as problems shift, as there's new things that come up, you got to be able to continue to stay nimble. And I honestly, I worry about that, because there's a lot happening, and when all your friends and the people around you are comfortable, it doesn't mean that everyone else in the organization is comfortable.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
I'm gonna sound like a super business person, not touchy-feely when I say this, but quantifying the ROI of investment in belonging. To quote Hamilton, like, we're in a moment and we need to make sure the moment becomes a movement. And I think the only way to really make sure systems keep moving is to be able to quantify the ROI.
Yeah, I love that idea. We're in a moment. We need to make it a movement. I do keep a mic on my desk just for mic drop moments. There have been several, but it was too far away. But now I just feel like we should have that. So thank you for sharing that. Dave, what's the next challenge?
Yeah, the next challenge, I think, is to, as someone said, I heard it because, kind of trying to, it's the business. I think the goal of any organization, you have responsibility to your shareholders, but I think you have also equal responsibility to the people that you work with and the communities you serve, and all of that has to be aligned. And the way the way you solve for that is, do good by employees, make sure they belong, make sure they feel heard. That in turn will lead for them to put in a better product and treating your customers better, which would lead to kind of your company gaining more traction. Thus, your investors are happy because you're growing. And so everything, I think, starts with their employees, and they're feeling valued and they feeling a sense of belonging. And then I think it kind of like cascades down to everything else.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all so very much. This was absolutely amazing. I was honored to be asked to moderate this, but even more so just hearing all of your experiences, lessons learned. I've learned a lot during this time. I hope others have as well. So thank you all so very, very much for being part of this. And more importantly, thank you for all the work that you are doing and that you continue to do.